Welcome everyone to today's new episode of this ESSNA's webinar series. My name is Laura Contin and I am part of the ESSNA Secretariat working on public affairs and new engagement. Before we start, I will do a couple of householding announcements. It would be great if you could stay on mute throughout the duration of the webinar, but feel free to keep your camera on. And after some introductory remarks and questions, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask all your questions. So please put your, type your questions in the chat box and who you want them to be addressed to, and then we will read them in the Q&A session. So, just a few words on ESSNA. For those of you who are not familiar, we are the voice of the specialist sports nutrition sector in Europe. With more than 40 members, we represent the sports nutrition sector, and we work closely with legislators at EU level, but also at national level, to ensure that the sports nutrition products are safe, effective, easily available, and transparent. So without further ado, here's the program for today's webinar. So we will have a few short presentations from our guest speakers. We have 3 representatives of the sports sector and various branches of the sports sector. Sports nutrition with Luca Bucchini, physical activity, gyms and fitness with Cliff Collins, and we also have sporting goods with Jerome Pero, and of course we have a representative from the European Commission, Mr. Yves Le Lostecque. After these introductions and presentations, we will have a few questions, and then we will have the Q&A and the final remarks. On today's topic, just a few introductory remarks. This topic is particularly relevant and timely, as a couple of days ago, the European sport ministers have released the Council conclusions on the impact that COVID-19 had on the sports sector and the recovery, the steps for the recovery of this sector. So while the ministers acknowledge that the sports sector has contributed to the prevention of the spread of the virus at the early stages of the outbreak, they are also aware that our sector has been severely hit by this pandemic, also from an economic point of view. And they're also exploring what options and what steps are needed for the way forward. So this topic is really timely today. So without further ado, let's start this discussion with our first guest, Luca Bucchini, who's the Vice Chair of ESSNA and also Managing Director of Allobatus Consulting. Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. I'm very glad to be here with you all today to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on our sports nutrition sector and the sports sector more broadly, and how we suggest to restart in a robust way after this pandemic. This pandemic, I think, has shown to us in our sector how closely linked we are with sports activities. We knew that, but the intensity of this link has been very clearly on display during this crisis. The next slide. The next slide, please. Now, during the pandemic, we were, as everyone, worried about our family members, of course. We were worried about people working within our companies. We were worried about the society at large. We were worried, of course, about the health of the athletes and the physically active people that we serve as an industry. But at the same time, we were concerned about the economic impact. We were concerned about the impacts on our industry. So, we ran a survey, recurring survey of ESSNA members, asking them what the impact was of the crisis. And you can see on the left-hand chart in this slide that most members have reported a decline in sales. So that's been the most evident impact. And we have reports from some member states where sales in bricks and mortar shops have dropped by as much as 85 to 90%. Even if the shops were open, allowed to be open, the impact has been dramatic. And on top of that, disruption to the supply chain. We also asked members what they thought were the reasons for the impact. And in the first, if you look on the right hand, the first issue mentioned was the cancellation of sporting events. Of course, people use our products during sporting events, but also the events provide the inspiration, the motivation for training, and thus for using our products, but more importantly, for being physically active and doing sports. So that was the first issue mentioned. And then we had gym closures. And gym closures, as we go forward, is really a big concern, because gyms are not just a place where people train. It's a place where people get motivated, get inspired, get challenged, where they receive advice on training, where they receive nutritional advice, which is precious. So it's a big concern how gyms are going to get out of this crisis. And then, of course, closures of shops themselves. The next, please. So there's a number of challenges associated with that. I will come to the biggest challenge in a minute, but let me mention some other ones. Well, the reopening has been slow and non-harmonized across Europe. Some of this was understandable, inevitable with the challenges and uncertainties with the pandemic. Some of this was frankly confusing. People have changed the ways that use sports, more workouts at home. This may be an opportunity, but also a challenge. We have also a fear of protectionist measures by member states. Some member states have taken this crisis as the wrong opportunity to do wrong things, actually, and to think and start with protectionist measures that would reduce consumer choice and increase costs from the industry, also disrupting supply chains. And I've mentioned this drastic drop in sales in bricks and mortars shops. Some of us think that they play an important role in the economy and also in the advice they give to users. But so especially for brands relying on such shops, this has been a major shock. E-commerce has done well, as you know, and has mitigated the overall impact. The next. So what is the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is really that first is change. Well, we have been looking at analyzing data from sports app companies, and these are data from Garmin, and they show that, for example, on the left side, that indoor cycling activity has increased dramatically in users of the app in the member states that have enacted lockdowns. As soon as lockdown kicked in, the activity, the indoor cycling went up. And the same with fitness equipment. And you probably experienced yourself that in many sports shops, fitness equipment was not available due to increased sales. So these have been changed. People have been training at home. Is this a durable trend? Probably so. Some people will continue to train at home for a long time. So this will require adaptation. But the bigger worry is that people, and there is a lot of data, there was no space to show it, but people have been walking less, exercising less in general. So there is a broader concern that after this crisis, people will be exercising less. One concern, for example, could be a generation that has grown during the pandemic, which is fearful of contact, of team sports, so not going to train, not going to do the same levels of physical activity that they would otherwise have done, on one end. But also, if you think about people who are not swimming anymore, there is data suggesting they were not enough physically active to start with, and there are indications that after this crisis they will do less sports. It requires a lot of motivation to start to be physically active. So this is a big concern. The biggest concern is that people will be exercising less after this crisis. The next, please. So many aspects, but we're short on time. So let's go to what we suggest. No, the next, please. The final one. So what are our priorities for starting? We think that health and safety needs to be a priority. We have seen with the Adria tour in the media in these days recently, then when you restart too early, that backfires. So we need to prioritize safety. We need good advice to do that. We need to consider compensating or making sure that sports sector in the broader sense is that we need the sports organizations, we need gyms, we need a place where people are motivated and trained. So if this doesn't happen, we will see less physical activity in the future. And finally, we need robust and good, excellent scientific advice from European bodies like the ECDC. We need to know, we have evolving advice on how to train safely. We need that at the European level. We need monitoring of the health of athletes, of sports people, of outbreaks if they occur, but also a general monitoring of how people resume doing physical activity to see which areas need to be tackled, also for us to improve our products, but to make sure that people go back to as much or more physical activity than before. And that's all for me. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the other presentations and the discussion after those.
Luca, thank you very much. This was extremely insightful, and we look forward indeed to dive more in details during the Q&A session. Now I am delighted to give the floor to our next speaker, Jerome Pero, who is the Secretary General of the Federation of European Sporting Goods Industry. Jerome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah,
if you not, okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll try to be short and concise as requested. So for those who don't know me, my name is Jerome Pero. I'm the Secretary General of FASI. And for those who don't know the organization, I'll show you on the next slide. So there we go. FASI is a Brussels-based non-profit association representing the interest of sports brands in Europe. We represent directly and indirectly around 1,800 sporting goods manufacturers and retailers, which basically represents 85% of the market. And we also have 12 national associations, one in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and so on. 70 to 75% of our business is made up of small and medium enterprises based in Europe, and we represented an annual turnover in Europe of 81 billion euros and employ more or less 700,000 people in Europe. Of course, these figures might change very slightly due to the COVID-19 crisis and not for the better. But in any case, there you can see a sample of our membership, those that are direct members. So you can see there some of the brands you know very well already. Next slide, please. So basically, this is just already a small introduction about our approach to physical activity. Luca Bucchini has already mentioned some worrying figures. So we have seen that between various Eurobarometers on sport and physical activity, there has been actually a decline from 42% of people that are not exercising to 46%. And this is, of course, a trend that might, due to the COVID-19 situation, not improve. So basically, this is an alarming call for us to act and to make sure that health and physical well-being and physical activity are taken into consideration in all policy-making steps. This, of course, has an impact on health and well-being. We understand that 20 to 35% of people who are active have less risks of contracting cardiovascular diseases, coronary heart disease, and strokes, which we call basically NCDs. And we have seen also that this has had an impact on citizens that have been affected by COVID-19, meaning that a previous health situation often was worse with a COVID-19 situation than a healthy person. So basically, this leads us to educate for the inclusion of sport in all health in all health policies when it comes to innovation, research, education, economy, mobility, infrastructure, grassroots sports, education, and also active workplaces. Next slide. So we basically, what have we been doing during the COVID-19 crisis? So as everybody, it's something that came as a very surprising and dramatic moment for the industry, but also for us as employees and family members and friends. But very rapidly, we needed to set up something. So the first thing we did was to set up a task force where we were informing all the members about any updates we have, and I'll show you a bit later on what we did. Then we were also aligning the industry about their needs on a short-term basis, but also on a long-term basis to understand what we can do immediately and what had to be done immediately, but also what on a long-term basis we are going to advocate for. And of course, all of this we have done by engaging with EU policymakers. Yves is here today, but also many others in other DGs, be it DG Grow, for example, and so on, where we have had contacts. Next slide, please. So here you can see what this task force has been mainly active on during the the height of the COVID-19 crisis. So, for example, as some of my peers that will speak later on, Cliff, for example, we have very much supported the excellent Be Active at Home campaign that the European Commission launched to make sure that while people were locked down at some point, they would still remain active and healthy. We have done so by promoting all the free apps that our membership all the brands have put online to help people be active with different coaching lessons, trainings, and things like that. And we have run a thorough social media campaign to influence people, and our members have uptaken this message with all the different initiatives they launched. Additionally, we created a web portal, a specific website page on our website. I invite you all to visit it, where you can find all the different informations about all the national exit strategies and things like that, which we were sharing with our membership so that they could adapt very rapidly to the local changing landscape from a commercial standpoint, opening of stores, safety measures, but also from a more sport and physical activity. So sport events that were being reopened and so on. So we were monitoring this on a daily basis and updating our database all the time so that members could be more agile and flexible. And by the way, this will be also one of the main conclusions, I think, of my introduction today. We launched a survey. We had very similar results to the survey that was presented just before. Just a couple of figures. We know that between March and May, our membership lost turnovers between 45 and 90% turnover. We know that e-commerce has helped a little bit alleviate the situation, but not enough. It compensated for more or less roughly 20%. And all of these figures you can find on our website. There is a report about the online survey, and we are using this, of course, to understand how to move forward and so on. We also organized a webinar, a couple of webinars, but one on the recovery, where we're taking the pulse of the recovery, basically, where we understood that the recovery is very slow for the time being, for very understandable reasons. The consumption mood is limited. The consumption, the consumers have changed also. We have less younger people, but more aging population that is aware now that they need to be more active and that have uptaken some sort of activity during the COVID-19. So there's also hope in there. The bicycle sector, for example, you may have seen, has skyrocketed during the COVID-19 crisis, and also now still you can see in Brussels many people driving with their bikes, which we hope will be a long-lasting trend, of course. We have, of course, drafted letters and statements with different coalitions to engage with policymakers and ask for harmonization and so on, but of course always keeping in mind the health and safety measures of our European citizens. We also have been very active on everything that is related to personal protective equipment. We promoted our members to offer support in times where there was a shortage of these products, especially in Europe. So some of them have reorganized their production and worked on face shields, barrier masks, gloves, and things like that that have been shared with the different frontline workers. We can move to the next slide, and I will be almost done. Well, that's it. So basically, the conclusion for me today is really that we need to look at the immediate short-term impact that this had, and what we can do in a harmonized way to support companies in a harmonized way across the member states to reopen safely. But also, of course, now we need to sit down, all of us together, and discuss about the long-term needs and things that we can do to improve the health of citizens, so that for the second, third, or fourth wave, or any other major health crisis, sanitary crisis that will come up, we are all better prepared. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerome. That was really, really interesting. And it's a perfect link to our next speaker, who is Cliff Collins, Europe Active Programs Director. Cliff, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Laura, and it's immensely kind of ESSNA to invite me here this afternoon to share some of the insights of what's been happening from the European fitness sector. As we all know, we pressed the pause button back in March, and as we're hitting the restart button, I think a lot of us realize that actually it's not where we left off, and it's going to be extremely difficult to get back to those points that we had before. The situation has changed very, very considerably. And I think it's worth just pausing for a moment to just reflect that some of us have had a personal and as well as business difficult times and periods, and we're not through this yet. At the end of February, we had more than 62,000 fitness centres across Europe. By the end of March, 95% of those clubs were shut, and that meant that more than 60 million people lost their place where they could go and have their workout in the usual way. And as one of our operators said to us, it took 10 years to build his business and 10 hours to close it down. The cost has been absolutely enormous, but now in 24 European countries, the clubs are reopening, albeit under some pretty strict conditions. And the effect of this is, of course, to limit the total number of people who can use the clubs. And therefore, the amount of revenues into the clubs is substantially below what they would have been used to. And most clubs are currently operating around about 50 to 60% of their previous income. So whilst they have many static overheads, the area which they are unfortunately cutting back on is with their staffing levels, particularly for the technical people, the fitness trainers themselves. But we already know that from the evidence that we're collecting, that more than 20% of all fitness trainers across Europe have become unemployed. Not furloughed, but unemployed. There's still plenty more on the furlough schemes, but these people have not been re-employed when the clubs have reopened. And many clubs have not even made it through, depending on which country we are surveying. It could be around 10% of businesses have gone bust. And in some countries, we are thinking that is as high as 20%. That's not to say that they won't reopen in a different way at a different time. For some clubs, it's a necessity that they open quickly because there is very little government support. Some countries, governments were very generous in how they financially supported the businesses and the employees, but in other countries, that was not the case. So in those situations in particular, those small businesses, the fitness clubs that we know in our own communities, had to get the doors open as quickly as possible. And that has created some problems. And I think it would be fair to say that the traditional model of the bricks and mortar type fitness centre is a casualty of the Covid-19 crisis. But in the meantime, we've experienced an incredible expansion of other learning experiences through digital technologies, and how many, many millions of people have now switched on to how they can safely exercise at home through all kinds of clever digital tools and fun and games. And for us, some of our fitness trainers became megastars, superstars almost overnight with their online workouts, sometimes reaching millions of people, like the Joe Wicks character in the UK, particularly aiming at children who were back home with their parents, couldn't do physical activity at school, so every weekday morning he would run a half-hour class for the kids. And of course, lots of the parents joining in at the same time. So I actually think, though, in the depth of this crisis, that politicians perhaps are getting the message about the importance of regular physical activity. And it was quite clear in many of those countries where lockdown guidelines were very strict indeed, that supporting physical activity was one of the key priorities. You could go out for your essential shopping and your medical and health cares, but also you could go out and exercise. And that was quite an important message, and something which I think we'll perhaps return to in our question and discussion opportunities later in this session. And also we have seen the European Union get its act together. I think at the start it was every country for themselves, but then quite quickly the Commission has stepped in and have come forward with some very ambitious plans, not least in terms of the very large sums of money which they are going to be putting towards the recovery programme. And I really, really hope, we hope from the fitness sector that the recovery really does take forward this whole issue of the critical role of physical, mental and social well-being in here. A lot of people have had a rough time, a really difficult time, and the memories are going to stay with them for a long time. So how can we be creative in our future going forward? So we spend a lot of our time in the early days trying to coordinate with our key stakeholders, especially our national associations. We have 25 national associations across Europe. And we started some very early planning with them on how we could try to get the clubs open as quickly as possible. Many of those organizations and other people came to us to ask for guidance on how the sector could be opened up. And so we decided to move away from publishing things and going online, and we've run now more than 20 different webinars. They are all on our COVID-19 webpage. They're all entirely free. It was another choice of Europe Active that no matter who you are or where you might be coming from, if you could get some value from joining into our webinars or looking at the research which we're publishing and the good guidance we were collecting, then that's good. We felt that was very much our responsibility. And one of the great outcomes for our experience here has been the way that so many organizations across the sector have come together to cooperate. It's really been a very positive outcome. People who you may think are absolute fierce commercial competitors have been quite prepared to open up their doors and their ideas and thoughts and to share them with everyone else. So we had a little look at what was going on around the world, not just across Europe, and in the end we published some guidance and got involved also with the World Health Organization to help them in their approach as well. And we have subsequently produced a series of e-learning modules to help employees in particular to understand what they need to know and what they need to be able to do when they go back to work in our fitness clubs. After all, these fitness trainers and all staff working in these environments really become frontline workers as such. So there is a personal responsibility in there as well as from the employer's perspective. So please do, and I invite you to visit our COVID-19 webpage to have a look at that. We also take the standard setting side of things extremely seriously, and we've been doing that work for many years in the fitness sector with the European Standardization Organization, CEN. And last year we published a set of standards for fitness clubs to work to called EN 17229. Through that process, we brought together some real top experts across Europe who have agreed now to come together to work on putting together a technical specification, a set of standards, if you like, for how clubs could remain open in the event of a further viral-based pandemic. We are all, I think, being warned in our own respective countries that there will be spikes, there will be second, maybe third waves of COVID-19, and maybe COVID-20, 21, or whatever else that may exist. So for us, the financial cost to the sector, our fitness sector, is absolutely enormous. So if there's some way that we can keep open that is going to help that huge financial crash, but also would enable people to be able to stay exercising for their physical, mental and social well-being, which for us is really important. So we didn't want to get too much stuck in the doom and gloom of all this, because you can get quite depressed, believe you me, when you're reading the stories and hearing what's happening at the European level. So we thought we'd better do something a bit more fun behind it. So we set up our Be Active Hour, part of the Commission's Be Active at Home campaign. And we just felt that we could try very hard to just coordinate people's thinking and focus on a 1 hour of activity. We chose Saturday 30th of May for that. And in there we built 4 reasons for this, bearing in mind this was just before lockdown restrictions were beginning to be lifted. And we said it should be active for your personal well-being, to help your immunity, which certainly is a very current theme at the moment politically. Be active for your resilience and also for your community. And so this was scheduled originally to coincide with what would have been the Champions League final. And we're hoping to encourage all those millions of people who would have been in their front rooms watching their TVs to just get out there and do something together. So Laura, well done. You're anticipating me here at the lead-in.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. That's brilliant. Thank you. We produced a little video. I have to tell you, it's not quite finished yet because we're missing a few of the shots. But if you'd be kind enough to play this, people will get an idea of what we tried to do.
Yeah, sure. I'll play the video now.
Thank you.
When the COVID-19 pandemic hit Europe, it seemed everything just stopped. The life we knew has suddenly changed. But some things must continue. The Be Active Hour campaign brought Europe together to celebrate the role activity plays in people's lives. There is no condition for which physical activity is not beneficial.
I am doing my Be Active Hour. Exercise is the best medicine. Nature is the best our friend.
To all of us, really, wherever we're from, we are united in one battle, which is to try and spread a positive, empowering spirit.
Physical activity has the power to change things, to make us better, and every minute of it matters. People all across Europe came out to be active together for our personal well-being, to help our immune systems, to build our resilience, and to support our communities. We're at the brink of a new era, where we all have to take responsibility for how we shape our future. This starts just with 1 hour.
Keep together as a community, so where maybe we can't meet in person, we can meet up like this through initiatives like Be Active Hour.
Find out more at www.europeactive.eu.
Thanks, Laura.
Wow. Bear Grylls' special appearance. That's amazing, Cliff.
Yeah, he led it from the UK side of things and linked up with trainers all across Europe. Yeah, hey, listen, it was a lot of fun. It's the first time we tried anything remotely like this, but it worked. It worked. You know, we particularly could pick up big spike in social media activity, promoting all of this. A lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people, had some fun with it. But we are very, very grateful to the Commission, the sport unit in particular, for their support behind the scenes for this to make this happen, and also from Commissioner Gabrielle herself. It was good fun, and we learned a lot, and we're going to build this into our next edition, which will be surrounding the European Week of Sport on the 23rd of September. There's the big plug for that. So look, I'm going to finish up shortly, but we understand the importance that fitness and leisure has in part of our social fabric and our society, and we do have a vital role to play here. We know that we have been missed being active together, but I just think it's mission impossible for us to go back to where we paused back in March. It is so much more challenging, and we have to reflect a little bit more on this. Some of you would have heard me say this recently in other sessions as well. But, you know, I think we've all had a bit of a brutal reminder of just how cruel life can be. It's shattered lives, it's ruined some businesses, but let's use this as a very positive opportunity to come together. I'm pretty sure that Yves will mention the intention to have a special meeting later this year to reflect on what is happening and how the sport movement can react to this. And he's been doing some research into the financial costs and impacts of what it's had. For our fitness sector, it's been absolutely extraordinarily big. So this is the opportunity. It's not a disadvantage. It's very positive for us. So we're looking forward to this. Even the others will know that we're big fans and supporters of the Tartu call from 2017. And we think that in terms of the broader concept of coordination and action, bringing many powerful people together here across the Commission, having their wonderful coordinating role, perhaps we can come up with something which really is going to promoting this holistic approach to healthy lifestyle. So it's joined up thinking. We are calling it trying to bring people together to start a new endeavour here. You're more than welcome to contact me if you had some ideas and thoughts about this. But for the fitness sector, we, as Arnie would say, we're back. And from this, we'll build something quite special. I'm sure of that. We're very inventive people, and we know that people actually genuinely do like to have a good workout. So we're there to help. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Cliff. That was absolutely very interesting, and also a great bridge to our next guest, which is the head of unit of the sport unit in the GEAC of the European Commission, Yves Le Lostecque, who's going to present the Commission's response to COVID-19, to the COVID-19 crisis. Yves, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you for inviting me in this good discussion. listening to the previous speakers, I would say that let's say the only good news is in all this bad and sad landscape is that it has upgraded, or it will contribute to upgrade the sport policy and the importance of sport at EU level, because you mentioned that I am presently the head of the sport unit. I had worked all my career in sport, and 20 years ago I was a policy officer in the sport unit, and sport was basically a non-subject. It was not a serious subject for the Commission. And then things have changed with the treaty. There was a legitimacy to intervene in the field of sport. There was a legal basis, and sport has been seen more and more not only as a tool for pleasure, but a tool of well-being, something also important, contributing to the economy, and also to health. And now, clearly, in this crisis, we have seen that sport has been seen and can be recognized as a major and privileged tool of prevention and of contribution to health. So I would say this is the only good news in this landscape. But what I'm supposed to do today is briefly to tell you about what has been done, what is being done at EU level in concerning the COVID-19 crisis by the Commission and sport ministers, because we are working on the same spirit, I would say, and there were initiatives taken, some of them horizontal and some of them specific to sport. You were mentioning two sport ministers meeting which took place in the last month and a half, organized by the Croatian presidency. I was lucky enough to participate in these two meetings, and what I'm going to tell you basically is what the Commissioner Gabriel announced during these meetings. The first thing on which I will be brief is that there are horizontal tools which have been adopted at EU level, which have been put in place, which can concern sport. They are not specific to sport. They cover all activities, all economic activities, I would say, but they can be used by the sports sector if the sports sector demands and requests or problems correspond to what is foreseen in these instruments. And I mentioned three of them under this slide. There is has been adopted a global response, which is a coronavirus response investment initiative, the CRI, which gives more flexibility in the use of European structural and investment funds. So a lot of money, 37 billion, have been mobilized within this instrument to help the economy in the coronavirus times. A recently adopted initiative is the SURE initiative, support to mitigate employment risk and in an emergency, and this is about mobilizing funds to support employees and employee salaries in all sectors, but they can concern potentially the sports sector, and also some measures which have their importance is that some specific in the field of state aid, which is a traditional field of intervention of the Commission. There are strict rules about state aid. A lot of flexibility has been introduced in this period, and specific schemes that include sport organizations were already accepted by the Commission. But I will not spend too long on these general measures, and I will just more comment on the other one, and we can change a slide. And because in the field I coordinate, there were specific actions, initiatives taken at the level where they are. I know that we are just an element, an actor, and there are many actors at all levels, from local to European level, to intervene, but this is our contribution. Maybe the less visible, but one of the most important one is to be flexible with all contracts and all commitments we took about the funding. Erasmus Plus was mentioned before. We have extended deadlines for some calls in order to allow sport activity, sport organizations to apply on time, and this was a request coming from many member states, and in particular Italy, by the way. And we have been, and we will be very flexible about the implementation of the contracts which are already signed and implemented, in terms of suspension of contracts, possibility to suspend them provisionally, to extend them, or to replace activities which were planned by other forms of activities, more digital, less physical. So on this is daily work, not visible, but a lot has been done in order to help sport organizations. The European Week of Sport is also a tool that we will use to let's say fight against the impact of coronavirus. The European Week of Sports, its activities and communication campaign. In activities, we will adapt also and invite all national coordinating bodies to adapt their plans, and we will be very flexible on this to cope with the current situation, even if what happens is not exactly what the Commission financed at the beginning or wanted to finance. And we will use also this European Week of Sport as a tool for communication in order first to promote sport and physical activity, which is the basic idea, but also to promote participation and membership in sport organizations, because I heard before that there was a fear that people would abandon and give up their structure. We are aware of this, and we will really work with our national partners on this. And also there is an initiative which is mostly an information initiative, which is about informing or inviting sport partners, I would say sport stakeholders, to make use of for the structural funds instruments, because this is possible and this is not enough known and used. We can change a slide. I will, Cliff just mentioned before the Tartu call, which was a very important instrument launched 2 years ago by 3 commissioners, including Commissioner Navracic, commissioner responsible for sport. This was a big success. It was a sort of action plan of the Commission in order to promote healthy lifestyle. It's a Tartu call for healthy lifestyle. And the very good news is that the new commissioner, Madame Gabrielle, is very interested in going further and in not relaunching, because it was not stopped, but giving a new ambition to this Tartu call. But this will be announced in the second semester. I think Cliff also mentioned it briefly. There will be a dedicated meeting on the future of sport in the second semester. We have traditionally in the first semester our European Sport Forum, which has not taken place. But there will be, we will organize let's say a high-level meeting with the Commission, EU institutions, member states, sport organizations, to discuss the future of sport, and in particular of EU sport, and in particular the context of the post-coronavirus situation. And this will take place. This is still to be fixed, but very probably somewhere in November next year. And my last slide probably is that. Yes, I will not comment on these things just for reasons of time, but I will just underline 2 things. Is that we are about to launch, it's a question of days, a study on the impact of the COVID-19 of the sports sector on the economic impact. It should be more precise in this slide. It will be a study where we will, during the 3 months, collect all information will be given to us by sport organizations, by member states, local public authorities, and the results will be published in September, and this will be used in the decision-making process. And I already mentioned the communication activities, and the Be Active at Home campaign was just mentioned. We can change a slide. So you will see that these are just contributions, but we are really trying to do our best to help and to contribute to support a sector which has been terribly struck by the crisis. My last slide is just to say that in the future we have adapted. You know, we had very ambitious plans for the future, for the policy, education, youth, and the sport policies, because our proposals was about doubling the budget compared to the current times, the current financial perspective. So it was our initial proposal was about 30 billion for education, youth, and sport. There have been revised proposals taking into account the coronavirus crisis. So our new proposal, which will be now discussed in the Parliament and the Council, is of 28 billion, more or less. So a slight change, but which remains a major or a substantial and spectacular increase to what is happening now, because we will continue in current prices. We will have a doubling and more than doubling of the budget, which is currently dedicated to education, youth, and sport. That's it. There is one last sentence. I would say it's not in the slide and in my presentation, but another privileged moment to discuss the future of EU sport, including the impact the coronavirus had, will be the negotiation or the renegotiation of the EU work plan for sport for the coming 3-4 years, and this will take place in the 6 coming months under the German presidency. So it's an important moment also to give even more visibility and importance to healthy lifestyle and to different ways to fight the impact of coronavirus. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Yves. That was really interesting and insightful, and also you're doing a lot already for the sector, so that's very good news. I'm just gonna launch the first question to Luca. In the meantime, if after we have like a few questions prepared, but in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box, and we will read them after these questions. So Cliff and Jerome already touched upon this, but Luca was wondering, what has ESSNA already done to facilitate the COVID-19 recovery phase?
So ESSNA has responded immediately. I think very well, I would say, in 4 main ways. We have created a guide, as I understand other organizations have done, but it's a public guide on the restrictions in the different member states. I think it's a very useful tool for people who want to have an overview of what is happening with restrictions across Europe, and it's updated every 2 weeks. So it's a useful tool. Then we have created a document with a crisis advice for our members, and also we have produced a guide for sports nutrition when training at home. So we felt that our consumers needed advice on what products would help when at home because of lockdowns. And finally, we have produced a position which I have summarized before, for policymakers on what we feel is needed to restart the reopening safely.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Jerome. What are the long-term needs any exit strategy should address, in particular to avoid a return to the current scenario?
Yes, thanks for your question. And actually it links also with a question that was asked in the chat box, if in hindsight we would change anything. So
yeah.
Partly we'll respond to both questions. I don't think naming and shaming what has happened in the past is the right way to go. But I think that there's a lot of lessons learned that we all still need to digest. I mean, It's been going on for the last 3 to 4 months, but it's now with all the data that we will receive, and also, for example, the study that will be launched by the Commission that will help us, do evidence-based policy making, but also commercial and economically based decisions within the business, and adapt to this new normal that will still evolve quite often because of local breakouts, because of a potential second wave in autumn and things like that. So the new normal is really just a temporary thing. So I think we really need to look at this from a very long-term perspective, and I think from a long-term standpoint, there's a lot that we can learn to prepare for future versions of this sanitary crisis, and maybe other crises and others, such as even climate change and things like that. And I think we need to work better together, all of us, the member states, together with the European institutions, to look at harmonization and less panic once something like this happens. I mean, we've seen that every region, every department, every country took their own decisions quite rashly, which is fully understandable. I mean, it was an unprecedented crisis, but perhaps we can establish some way to work better together in the future. I also think that on a long-term basis, we really need to look at health and sport and well-being and physical activity in general. And the Tartu call was mentioned many times. We're a great supporter of this, and we really feel like it should be extended to many other policy areas. A little bit like sustainability or climate change is now part of all policy decisions. I think really the well-being of citizens with physical activity and health should be part of all the policy decisions as well, because we see that prevention is so helpful in such unforeseen situations and can only be beneficial. I think that's it. We have also seen all the major implications this has on tourism, on culture, and these were not the first things we were thinking of when we were doing the blanket lockdowns all over countries and so on. And I think now all these specificities and local outbreaks and so on. So a bigger call for flexibility and agility from the commercial world, but also from the political decision makers. But again, I'm confident that we will learn a lot from this, and we will be much better prepared for future versions. And I hope there won't be any, but you never know. One last point, maybe on a long-term basis, we also mentioned digital transformation. I think that this is something very important. We will have to use this. It will not change everything, but we see in our industry since quite a while that the brick and mortar business is suffering and needs to work together with e-commerce. One does not go without the other, but we need support to make sure that the EU remains a competitive continent when it comes to digital transformation. So from a long-term standpoint, those are a couple of reflection points. But of course, we could talk about this for the next 3 hours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not a thing for an hour webinar. Thank you very much, Jerome. That was really insightful. Maybe we can touch upon later in the discussion. Luca, you mentioned earlier in the presentation that people have to change their sport habits because of coronavirus. So if the way of practicing sport will permanently change in the post-COVID-19 scenario, how will the sports nutrition sector need to adapt and change potentially?
Well, I'm not sure that the change will be permanent. What I think is very likely that people will train more at home. That would be a change. And we will need to change as a sports nutrition sector, because we have seen changes, immediate changes. We have seen convenience formats go down as well without sporting events, less of isotonic drinks and energy gels. So we have seen immediate changes, but so more an emphasis on immunity. But overall, I think we have to think hard if people are training at home in different ways to find perhaps different formats. Convenience formats may not be the right thing to do. Maybe the energy needs would be different because people train differently. The type of training you can do at home is different, so the products will have to be different. There is a question about e-sport. I don't know the answer to that yet, but there are many things happening that we need to consider if the ways people used to do sports change. And I think that's why we need data, what changes and how we can help with better products.
Okay, thank you. Definitely some food for thought for our sports nutrition industry here. And I have a question for Cliff. So you mentioned that trainers have been one of the victims of this COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately. So what should the sports sector expect and be prepared for after this pandemic, also with regard to the role of trainers themselves?
Thanks, Laura. I agree with many of the points actually that Jerome was making there, and we had some big debates to have. I know that every country across Europe would do a risk assessment on what is the most harmful or damaging catastrophes that could befall their countries, and always number one on the list for many years has been a pandemic. But there are very few countries in Europe, indeed around the world, who were properly prepared, even though they recognised the risks. And for our businesses in the sports sector, fitness sectors, and elsewhere, we were very ill prepared. It came as a out the blue almost, and was so fast that we found it difficult to react. So for us, it wasn't about the money, because everyone wants the money really. We all need some help here to survive. But the most essential thing here is to keep up, I think, a political dialogue. The sports sector must be convincing to our policymakers, our politicians, decision makers, that actually they can trust us in the way that we can run our facilities and look after people, so that they can engage at one level or another in health enhancing physical activity, which we now know is so critical in this type of crisis. So I think that the political message must be there. So this is something we mustn't forget. Just because the lights come back on and people start playing sport again, that's not the end of this. We have to make sure that we have a much more robust means of communicating back to our policymakers. In terms of the way things are changing, yes, we've seen this huge rise of digital technologies, which is clearly going to affect the way many people are going to be exercising in the future. So we have already set up a review committee to look at what is out there on the internet to make sure that it's safe exercise, it's done in a responsible way, that if necessary warnings are given about other potential risks of exercising and these types of things. And we'll collect that evidence, and we'll look at the way that we, not to regulate, but to give some guidance, sensible guidance on what might be good or what might be bad out there. With the people who work in our sector, they need new skills now, some of them, many of them. We can see that people coming back to start to participate in sport and to come into fitness clubs, they are bringing with them all kinds of other problems. We have what we call the superheroes who came back to our clubs and said, I'm going to carry on where I left off, I'm going to give it loads. And they're not really the people we want. It's the majority of people who are going to be very cautious. They have been affected in the crisis. They need the confidence there. The staff need the confidence. So we feel that there's a whole range of empathetic type skills which our trainers and staff working in sport environments and fitness clubs will need in the future. They also will need some broader skills, perhaps, in being able to identify underlying mental health issues, for example, how to liaise with other health professionals who might be providing a broader range of services. We might have the equipment, the facilities, and the opportunity, but it's really those higher and more specialist skills. And that's what we're looking at the moment. We've set up our own task force of experts who are thinking about this and the scoping of it, and we will get some preliminary work out within the next 3 or 4 months, which will begin to give an indication of what we're talking about here and how we will have to change some of the thinking about the roles, responsibilities and occupations in the future for sport coaches, fitness trainers and the like. But really, I think our big message here is we have to be convincing, so we have to get our story absolutely right, be very professional at all times. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cliff. I have a final question for Yves. So from a European Commission perspective, how do you envisage a safe reopening of all sports activities in the coming months?
This is a question to which I will answer very carefully, because precisely the approach of the European Commission till now on all these subjects has been to be very respectful of the national approaches. And by the way, when we had these two meetings of the sport ministers with Commissioner Gabriel, there were exchange of views. All ministers expressed the situation in their countries, their approach concerning opening facilities, allowing events to take place again, allowing sport activities to take place again. And but the Commission and the Commissioner didn't want at all to give lesson and to say you must do this way or this way, because each national situation was different, and this is basically the competence of the national authorities. And there is another good example on this. It's the European Week of Sport. It was mentioned before, because we prepared it as it happened in the past. So we have given budgets, important budgets to all EU member states to organize their national activities, and this takes the form of contracts. And now, presently these days, in June and beginning of July, we're adapting to national situation, not telling you must do this and this, but maybe in Germany it will not the same approach as in France. So on this, I will be very careful in answering, because each situation is different, and we have to trust, and we trust national authorities to take the right decision.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yves. So now, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We have a couple of questions there. One was already answered by Jerome, but I think it's interesting to look into this other question. So do you think the way people conceive sport will change forever? Also, maybe combining the other question that we have. So we're moving towards a more digital, virtual world. So that could also be a challenge for the sport movement as a whole. So what do you think we're going with the future of sport? Who would like to start? Maybe Luca?
Thank you. No, I don't think personally that the perception of sports will change. I don't think so. I mean, it may take a few years, but no, I don't think so. In terms of the digital world, I agree with other speakers that it is social media have helped greatly during the crisis in terms of facilitating people, how people could train at home. And I think for a minority of people, they will continue to be important. But I also think that we should be under no illusion that social media can substitute fitness clubs or sports events. I think it could be a dangerous illusion to think that the gap can be filled by digital media. So I think we have to be careful in that sense too. That the message needs to be that we need to go back to actual sports in the physical world.
Jerome, do you echo this comment? Do you have a different?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's too early to say if the way citizens will perceive sport will change forever, and forever is maybe a bit strong. I think there will be adaptations. Adaptations that might have happened in any case, but they will be accelerated maybe. If you just look, for example, at the work-home balance, there are things happening. You can see that home working is now becoming more a trend. Now, whether these trends are just something short-term post-crisis, or whether this will remain for long-term, needs to be seen. But if the work-home balance changes, then it means that people will be a bit more active at home or around their house. We have seen that more people have bought bikes, that more people will probably now have been used to bikes and will probably use them to go to work. So you know, I think there are some things that might just be accelerated through the crisis. We've seen through the survey of one of our members, the European Outdoor Group, for example, that people are very eager now to do more outdoor activities like hiking, trailing, running, and so on. So this is something, but whether it will be a long-term trend, we still need to see. We see also some different consumption trends for the moment happening, but this is also maybe due to the mood, to fear, which also we once more need to see. So I agree with Luca. I'm not sure that for the next 100 years it will totally change, but I think that some things maybe will be accelerated, and we will see some minor adaptations, of course, of life and physical activity and sport.
Okay, thank you very much. Definitely hard to foresee 100 years, but we can try. Cliff, do you have any further thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think it will be the same, personally. You know, I'm old enough to remember that the third industrial revolution, when computers were first starting, everyone was saying this is going to give us so much free time so we can have lots of leisure activities and the rest of it. And I don't know about you and the others on this conference call, but I've never worked so hard in my life sitting in front of my laptop looking at Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. Things are not going to be the same. Of course, we have a deep, deep love and affection for these traditional sports, the soccer, the swimming, cycling, and the role that these sports play in our communities is not going to go away. But I think the sports may have to adapt. If we do have prolonged periods where you can't have team sports and team activities, you can't use the communal, the touchy parts of sport, which is important to how they run and to meet the rules of the sports, different sporting activities, then there are potentially problems. But with that comes the opportunities, and we've only just started on this digital technology route. So I think that's very exciting how these very clever people are going to interact with us in the future, and how sport will adapt and will change. So it is fun. It might, but it will be different in my view. There'll be plenty of the same, but there'll be plenty of the new as well, in my view.
Okay, thank you very much. Yves, I'm gonna leave you the last word on this from an institution point of view. You've heard the business, but what do you think we're gonna go towards?
I'm not sure that what I will say will represent my institution's position, but what I can say is that I don't know, because when at the very beginning of the crisis, I spent time every day. I was running on my running machine, you know, watching en boucle TV programs on coronavirus, and I was hearing the world will change forever. Never we will come back to this the current situation, to the past situation. Now I hear a lot of journalists 3 months later saying we are back to the past. We are just coming back to the situation as it was before. So I don't know. I don't know. We must wait to have a long-term vision. My only comment is that there is something which can change, is that people have discovered new ways of practicing sport at home without any structure. There were, thank you for the colleagues who mentioned our campaign, but I saw so many creative ideas on the social network, and I think many people have come to a sort of sport and physical activity, in a way of practicing sport and activity in a way they didn't know before. So this is good. This is positive. The challenge, I already mentioned it, is that we must it must not be at the detriment or against structures, sport organizations, fitnesses that we must support, and this is one of the things on which we will contribute to support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are running a bit over time, so I'm gonna wrap up soon. Does any panelist have any final words in literally like 15 seconds each to wrap up their thoughts? Or Luca, do you want to start? No, Luca? Jerome?
No,
sorry, you're here.
15 seconds. I think we really need to work together to bring people back to doing sports, more sports than before. That's the main message.
Thank you. Cliff?
Yeah, sure. Be active for your personal well-being, be active for your immunity, and be active for your resilience, and be active in your community.
Perfect. And Jerome?
Yeah, I would echo that we all need to work together for a better future, and we need to uphold and maintain and improve investments in sports infrastructures, and to make sure that sport and health, sport and physical activity are used as a prevention tool.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So with this, I'm going to wrap up now very briefly. So thank you for joining today's webinar. We will have the episode 3 of this series airing in mid-July on the opportunities and challenges for the sports nutrition sector in times of COVID-19. So a discussion on the lessons learned. I want to thank very much all the attendees and the speakers in particular for this very insightful discussion. We will produce a video with the recording also for those who couldn't participate. So thank you very much once again, and stay tuned for more. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.